Riviera Country Club in Pacific Palisades never looked more perfect than it did that Tuesday afternoon in 1966. The grass was emerald under the California sun, manicured to impossible precision, each blade standing at attention like soldiers awaiting inspection. Dean Martin stood on the seventh hole with a cigarette dangling from his lips and a 9-iron in his hand, the picture of effortless grace that had made him America's favorite myth. He was supposed to be filming a scene for one of those breezy Matt Helm pictures later that evening, but the afternoon belonged to silence. Golf was never about the game for him. It was about the quiet between swings, the moments when nobody expected him to be charming or drunk or cool. Just a man, a club, and the sun warming his shoulders. His playing partner that day was a studio executive whose name history has mercifully forgotten. The kind of man who talked about box office numbers while Dean studied the grain of the green. They were approaching the 8th tee when Dean stopped mid-stride, his body going still in that particular way that meant the world had shifted without warning. The executive kept walking, kept talking, his voice dissolving into the afternoon air like smoke from Dean's lucky strike. But Dean had heard something else threading through the country club symphony of distant laughter and clinking glasses. It was small and broken and didn't belong in this manicured paradise. The sound of a child crying. She was maybe 7 years old, standing near the edge of the fairway where the perfect grass gave way to wild brush, her face red and swollen with the kind of grief that feels like the end of everything when you're small. She was calling a name into the emptiness, over and over. Buttons. The word hung in the hot air like a prayer. Nobody was answering. The executive finally noticed Dean had stopped and turned back, irritation flickering across his face like heat lightning. They had a tee time. They had 18 holes to finish. They had money riding on this game. But Dean was already handing his club to the caddy, already walking toward the fence with that same unhurried grace he brought to everything, as if the world could wait, because Dean Martin had decided it would. What happened next would never make the papers. There would be no photographers, no press releases, no carefully crafted image of Dean Martin.
Mr. Williams, just one photo.
Just 3 hours of a man on his hands and knees in the California brush, his expensive slacks torn, his white shirt stained with dirt and grass, calling out for a puppy named Buttons, while a little girl followed behind him, her tears slowly drying in the golden afternoon light.
Pleasure doing
Studio
business with
executive left after 20 minutes,
Likewise.
muttering about schedules and
successful
responsibilities. The other golfers played through, shaking their heads at the spectacle of the king of cool crawling under hedges for a mutt. But Dean never looked back, never checked his watch, never suggested they give up, because somewhere in that moment, the mask had slipped completely away, revealing not the drunk from the nightclub or the smooth operator from the movies, but a father who understood that when a child's world breaks, you stop everything to help put it back together. Dean Martin spent his life making the difficult look easy, but stories like this reveal the heavy cost of that cool. If you want to keep the memory of the true Rat Pack alive, consider supporting the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support helps us uncover these lost legends. Now, let's go back to that perfect Tuesday afternoon in 1966 on the 7th hole of the Riviera Country Club, when the coolest man in America became something far more important. The heat sat gently on the Riviera Country Club that Tuesday afternoon in 1966, the kind of soft California warmth that makes everything feel unrushed and eternal. You could hear the lazy soundtrack of privilege drifting across the fairways, the low thud of a distant tee shot, a burst of laughter from the patio bar, the faint clink of ice
and a
settling
bottle
in
of the
highball
58
glasses.
Bordeaux.
Somewhere a cart rolled over gravel with a muted crunch, tires whispering against the path, and above it all, like a steady heartbeat, the quiet hush of wind through the eucalyptus trees. This was the kind of place where men in expensive slacks discussed million-dollar deals between swings, where the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and cigar
I'm the
smoke,
luckiest man
that
in this club.
particular perfume
Oh,
of American
stop it, you're
success
making me
that
blush.
Dean Martin had learned to wear
Happy
like a second
anniversary, my
skin.
love.
By 1966, the world had
Oh,
become
you
a
shouldn't
deafening
have.
place for
It's
the king
beautiful.
of cool. Every time he stepped out his front door, he was assaulted by flashbulbs, screaming fans, and the relentless machinery of his own fame. But here, amidst the rolling emerald hills of the Pacific Palisades, there was only the wind in the trees and the rhythmic, satisfying thwack of a club hitting a ball. This wasn't just a game for him, it was a sanctuary, the one place left where Dino Crossetti, the barber's son from Steubenville, could breathe without performing. Golf was never about the score for Dean. It was about the silence between swings, the moments when nobody expected him to be charming, or drunk, or cool. Just a man, a club, and the sun warming his shoulders while the world spun on without demanding anything from him. On the seventh hole, Dean stood with a 9-iron in his hand and a cigarette between his fingers, exhaling a thin ribbon of smoke that vanished into the pale blue sky. The pressed polo shirt, casual stance, the way he studied the green with half-lidded eyes, all suggested he might be thinking about the shot, or might be thinking about absolutely nothing at all. Beside him, the studio executive never stopped talking. Numbers, contracts, box office receipts for the next Matt Helm picture. His words tumbled out too fast, a constant stream of pressure disguised as conversation, oblivious to the fact that Dean was trying to guard his peace with the ferocity of a lion. Dean listened the way he always listened when someone tried to sell him the future, politely, half there, half somewhere far away. They were walking toward the 8th tee when it happened. The executive's voice blended into the background, just another noise among many, and then, through the comfortable, curated soundscape of money and leisure, something cut across like a cracking glass, a small, jagged sound, high, thin, not meant for this place, a child crying, not the theatrical wail of a tantrum, but genuine distress, the kind that comes from a place too deep for pretense. Dean stopped walking so abruptly the caddy almost ran into him, his head tilted slightly, as if he were tuning a radio trying to catch a faint station beneath the static. The effortless slouch was gone. He stood perfectly still, listening with an intensity that he rarely showed on camera. Behind him, he could hear the executive's shoes tapping impatiently on cart-path concrete, a different kind of sound, sharp, annoyed, used to being obeyed. There, near the edge of the fairway where the perfect grass gave way to wild brush, stood a little girl no older than 7, her face red and swollen with the kind of grief that feels like the end of everything when you're small. She was calling a name into the emptiness, over and over. Buttons. The word hung in the hot air like a prayer nobody was answering. Dean was already handing his club to the caddy, already walking toward the fence with that same unhurried grace he brought to everything, as if the world could wait, because Dean Martin had decided it would. The performer's smile, the easy wisecrack, the shrug, none of it appeared. What came instead was a quiet that felt like a decision. In that moment, the movie star vanished. The drunk act evaporated. All that was left was a man who remembered what it felt like to be small and scared in a world that felt too big to handle. The game was over. The real work had just begun. To understand why the biggest star in the world would drop to his knees in the dirt for a stranger, you have to look past the tuxedo and the martini glass permanently glued to his hand in the public imagination. You have to go back to Steubenville, Ohio, back to a cramped apartment where the sounds of poverty echoed through thin walls like a nightly symphony. Floorboards creaked under his father's tired footsteps after double shifts at the barbershop. Pipes rattled like old bones when the heat barely worked. And through it all, the sound that haunted young Dino Croccetti most was his mother's soft sobs, that small, broken music of a woman trying not to cry loud enough to wake her children while she pressed her palms against bills she couldn't pay. He was maybe 8 years old when he truly understood helplessness, sitting at that kitchen table, watching his mother's shoulders shake with the weight of mathematics that never worked in their favor. His father was working every hour God gave him, but it was never enough. The numbers never added up. Dino sat there, feeling the crushing weight of his own uselessness. Too small to fix anything, too young to earn money, helpless in the face of his mother's quiet desperation. That feeling carved itself into his bones, a frequency he would never stop hearing. It just transformed over the decades into something else entirely, a compulsion that kicked in whenever he saw someone hurting and thought maybe, just maybe, he could do something about it this time. The drunk act came later, crafted with the precision of a master illusionist and the desperation of a man who needed armor. By the time Dean hit it big, he'd perfected the persona of the happy, careless lush
let me know
who
if you feel
stumbled
any
through
sharp
life
pain
on
as I
luck
press
and
down
charm.
here.
The scotch in his glass was usually apple juice. The slurred words were carefully rehearsed timing. The whole performance was a suit of armor designed to keep the world at arm's length while controlling exactly what people thought they knew about him. If everyone believed he was too numb to feel,
These documents
they'd
prove
never
you were
look
at the
deeper.
scene that night.
They'd never see the immigrant kid
This
who
is a
still
forgery.
felt
I
like
deny
an imposter
everything.
at every Hollywood party, who carried the sounds of Steubenville in his chest like stones. The stories leaked out slowly over the decades, always against his wishes, whispered by the people who glimpsed the man behind the costume. Anonymous checks to struggling musicians whose names he'd heard once at a jam session. Hospital bills paid for dying extras with instructions that the source never be revealed. The time he fired a publicist on the spot for trying to leak a story about his charity. Genuinely confused about why anyone would think that mattered. His integrity lived in shadows by design, because praise made him physically uncomfortable. You help people because they need help, not because it makes you look good.
I told
That
you I'm
was
not
the
paying
code
for
he'd
this.
learned
Now leave us
watching his
alone.
father give free haircuts to men who couldn't pay, never mentioning it, never keeping score. So when he stood on that golf course and heard
should've
Sarah
never come
crying
here.
for her lost puppy,
Let
he didn't
go of
hear
me.
an interruption to his leisure. He heard a frequency that the studio executive was deaf to, an echo from 40 years earlier when he was too small to stop his mother's tears. This time, unlike when he was 8 years old and useless, he could actually do something about it. The choice wasn't heroic to him. It was just the only choice that made sense to a man who had spent his entire life trying to find something real in a world built on illusion. The King of Cool was just a costume, and in the face of that little girl's raw panic, Dean unzipped the suit and stepped out of it completely. They started with no plan, just a promise. Dean crouched down so he was eye level with Sarah, the distant thud of golf balls and murmur of the clubhouse fading into something far away and unimportant. Her crying came in those ragged little gasps that scraped the throat, hands twisted in the hem of her shirt. The name fell out of her again, like a reflex. Buttons. Dean said it back to her softly, as if he were being introduced to an old friend, his voice dropping to that gentle register he usually reserved for his own children. He asked her about Buttons with the patience of someone who understood that panic makes the world feel impossible. What does he look like? What are his favorite treats? Where does he like to sleep? With each answer, Sarah's breathing steadied just a little, her terror transforming into something more manageable, a shared mission with specific, hopeful goals. They moved away from the manicured perfection of the fairway into the wilder, dusty scrub that bordered the property line. The silence here was different, not the polite hush of the country club anymore, but the buzzing, heavy silence of the California brush, thick with the smell of dry sage and heated earth. Dean didn't send Sarah off to wait in the shade. He walked right beside her, matching her small, frantic strides with his own long, easy gait, helping her over drainage ditches, offering his handkerchief when fresh tears came, without comment or fuss. He enlisted help the way only Dean Martin could, quietly, without demanding anything, just inviting people into the circle of
I shouldn't even
concern.
be here right now.
Groundskeeper with
Relax,
a mower,
nobody
a
knows you're
security guard on patrol, a gardener wrestling with a hose. No orders, no star tantrums, just that soft authority in his tone. Mind keeping an eye out, fellas. We lost a friend. Delivered with warmth that made refusal feel unthinkable. He moved through the landscape like a gentle contagion, infecting everyone he met with the sudden, urgent need to help a little girl find a mutt. The golf cart arrived after maybe an hour, tires crunching aggressively on gravel. A breathless assistant leaned out, panic in his eyes. The studio called. The producer is waiting. The car is ready. It was the summons back to Olympus, the reminder that Dean Martin was a corporation as much as a man, and the corporation was losing money every minute he spent playing detective in the weeds. Dean didn't even look at his watch, just wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of a dirty hand and waved the cart away. Tell them I'm busy. Another cart came an hour later, then a phone call delivered by a nervous caddy. Each interruption met with the same calm dismissal, his eyes never leaving the ground, his voice never losing that steady reassurance that told Sarah they would find buttons, because quitting wasn't an option. By the third hour, the sun was a physical weight on their shoulders. Dean's expensive Italian loafers were scuffed beyond repair, his custom-tailored slacks snagged on brambles, torn at the knees. Sweat had soaked through the back of his polo shirt, and his perfectly styled hair fell across his forehead in damp strands. To anyone watching from the clubhouse balcony, it must have looked insane. The most famous man in America looking like he'd been dragged through a hedge.
Mr. Williams,
Dean
just one
never
photo.
sighed, never checked the time, never suggested they give up.
We did it, my friend.
Kept calling the name.
It's finally
with
over.
the same commitment he brought to singing love songs.
I can't
to
believe
packed
it.
Vegas
Thank
showrooms.
you so much.
They reached a concrete drainage ditch near the edge of the property, an ugly scar half hidden by overgrown oleander. Sarah had
That was
gone
brilliant,
quiet,
man.
exhaustion
Absolutely brilliant.
finally overtaking
Best
hope.
show I've seen
Dean
all
stopped,
month.
held up a hand,
Thank you all so much
tilted
for
his
coming
head
out tonight.
towards something beneath the drone of cicadas. Then it came, faint as a heartbeat, a tiny whimper echoing from the dark mouth of the storm drain.
Thank you all.
Dean didn't hesitate.
We couldn't have
He
done
dropped
this
to his
without
stomach
you.
in the dirt, ruining
This
the last
victory
clean inch
belongs
of his
to the
shirt,
people.
and reached his arm into the darkness, fingers searching blindly for something warm that might still be saved. Dean's arm disappeared into the darkness up to his shoulder, concrete scraping against his expensive shirt as he pressed deeper into the culvert. His fingers found fur first, matted and damp with storm water, then the trembling warmth of a small body pressed against the pipe wall. Sarah stood above him, holding her breath so tightly her chest ached, hands twisted into fists at her sides. The world had shrunk to this moment, this reach into darkness that might pull back empty or might save everything that mattered. Dean's voice went soft, almost a whisper, coaxing the terrified animal toward his hand, with sounds more than words, that universal language of comfort that works across species and fear. Slowly, carefully, he withdrew his arm, and there in his dirt-streaked hands was Buttons, a scruffy terrier mix covered in mud and cobwebs, shaking like a leaf but gloriously, impossibly alive. The sound that came out of Sarah wasn't quite a word,
Welcome back, sir.
more
Thank
like
you.
something
It's good
breaking
to be
open in
here.
her chest.
The
Her
band
knees
is really
buckled,
swinging
and
tonight.
she dropped beside Dean,
I presume
gathering
the
the
arrangements
puppy
are
to her with
finalized.
desperate tenderness while tears poured down her face. Different
Everything
tears
is in order,
now,
sir.
relief so powerful it felt like drowning in reverse. Buttons squirmed for a heartbeat, then recognized her scent and settled against her collarbone, his whole body vibrating with the frantic rhythm of his tail. Dean sat back on his heels in the dirt, watching their reunion with satisfaction that had nothing to do with applause or recognition. No orchestra swelled, no audience witnessed the moment. Just wind moving through the scrub and the distant crack of a golf ball finding its mark on some faraway green. He didn't insert himself into their joy or make it about his effort. He simply let the moment belong entirely to them. Two small creatures reunited in a world that suddenly felt right again. The walk home took them away from the country club's manicured perfection into the working-class neighborhoods that bordered it. Streets where modest houses sat close together and chain-link fences marked careful property lines. Dean carried Buttons because the puppy was still too frightened to walk steadily, cradling him against his ruined shirt without a thought for the additional damage. People recognized him, of course. How could they not? But the recognition came with stunned silence, as if seeing Dean Martin walking their sidewalk covered in dirt with a child's hand in his was so far outside possibility, their brains couldn't process it. A woman watering roses lowered her hose, staring. Two men washing a car froze mid-scrub. Dean just nodded politely and kept walking, focused entirely on getting Sarah and Buttons safely home, treating their neighborhood with the same easy respect he showed Beverly Hills. Robert Kellerman opened his front door expecting his daughter, and found instead a tableau he would spend years trying to explain to people who didn't believe him. Dean Martin on his porch, clothes destroyed, holding a muddy puppy, while Sarah beamed up at him like he'd performed miracles. The recognition hit Robert like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. But before he could stammer gratitude, Dean's visible discomfort diffused the moment. He handed over Buttons with a self-deprecating joke about his golf game being shot anyway, and somehow, within minutes, they were all sitting in the modest living room like this was perfectly natural. Dean stayed nearly an hour, playing with Buttons on the worn carpet, talking to Sarah about pet responsibility with genuine seriousness. When she asked shyly for an autograph but had no paper, Dean noticed a family photo on the mantel, her late grandfather in military uniform. He signed the back carefully, to Sarah and Buttons. The best things in life are worth searching for. Her friend, Dean Martin. Below it, he added a phone number, telling Robert quietly to call.
I said
if
get
they ever
out!
needed anything,
I'm through with all of you!
Completely. He walked back to the club alone in gathering twilight, his shadow stretching long across pavement. As he drove home through thickening Los Angeles traffic, he didn't think about missed appointments or angry executives. He just thought about Sarah's face when Buttons licked her cheek, that pure, uncomplicated joy that reminded him why any of this mattered at all. The house held that particular silence that comes after a life ends, when familiar rooms echo differently and every surface seems to whisper with absence. Michael Kellerman moved through his grandmother's bedroom in the autumn of 2015, surrounded by cardboard boxes that sighed softly when he shifted them, releasing little puffs of a life carefully folded away. The air carried that dry rustle of old paper and fabric, faded perfume mixing with the dusty sweetness of letters tied in ribbon. Every drawer he opened exhaled another fragment of Sarah's 8 decades, brittle greeting cards settling with soft whispers, the gentle thump of worn sweaters landing in donation piles.
This is what happens when you
Found
don't
the
listen.
shoebox on
Do
the
you understand
highest
me?
shelf of her closet, tucked behind winter coats she hadn't worn in years, wrapped in tissue paper gone yellow with age. The cardboard was soft under his fingers, corners rounded by time, held closed by a rubber band that snapped with a tired crack when he pulled it away. Inside, photographs lay in loose stacks, their glossy surfaces dulled to something softer than memory. The flutter of paper sliding against paper filled the quiet room as he thumbed through decades of birthdays and Christmases, his mother as a teenager, his uncle with a bad haircut from 1974. Then he saw it, and the air left his lungs in one slow, disbelieving exhale. A Polaroid, colors washed to gentle pastels, edges slightly curled with age. A little girl with gap-toothed smile.
You admit you were aware of the
crooked
financial
pigtails,
discrepancies
clutching
when
a
you signed the
scruffy terrier
document.
so tightly its fur bunched between her small fingers. Beside her, unmistakably, Dean Martin in a golf shirt, one knee clearly stained with dirt, his hair mussed, his posture relaxed in that way that looked both lazy and perfectly balanced. Even faded and aged, the face was undeniable. Michael had grown up with the story, of course. Every family gathering seemed to wind its way eventually to the legend of the day Dean Martin found Buttons. As a child, he'd thought it was family mythology, the kind of polished tale that gets shinier with each telling, until truth and magic become impossible to separate. Later, he'd assumed it was mistaken identity, a man who only looked like Dean, memory transformed by decades of retelling. But the photograph didn't lie, and neither did his grandmother's careful handwriting on the back, the day Dean Martin found buttons, summer 1966. Below that, in a different hand, smoother and hurried, the autograph that had become family treasure to Sarah and Buttons. The best things in life are worth searching for.
Charges.
Your friend, Dean Martin. Sarah had built her entire life on the template
The trumpet
that
solo is
afternoon.
incredible tonight.
She'd become a veterinarian,
Yes, he really
dedicating
captures
40
the
years
mood.
to healing animals. And when asked why she'd chosen that path, she always circled back to a Tuesday in 1966, when the most powerful man she ever met had knelt in dirt for her. She taught her children that integrity is what you do when no one important is watching, that real power means choosing kindness when you don't have to. The family had listened to her story with that particular attention reserved for beloved myths. But holding the photograph, Michael realized with a jolt that every word had been absolutely
Look what
true.
you did!
On
This is
impulse
completely
that felt more
unacceptable
like
service.
destiny,
I'm not paying
Michael
for this.
dialed the phone number
Sir,
Dean
please
had
calm
written
down.
beneath his
It was an
signature.
accident.
Faded, but still legible after 50 years. He expected nothing but a disconnected tone, maybe a confused stranger. Instead, after 3 rings, a woman answered, identifying herself as the estate manager for the Martin Family Trust. Michael explained who he was, why he was calling, his voice shaking slightly as he described the photograph. The silence stretched long enough
Stay away
that he
from her,
thought
you
the
hear me?
connection had dropped. Then,
What are you doing?
he asked him
Get
to
off
hold
me!
while she checked the files. What she told him 15 minutes later
your hands
made
off
him
me!
sit down
You can't
hard
do
on his
this! I haven't
grandmother's
done
bed.
anything wrong!
A week after the puppy incident, Dean had quietly established a small educational trust in Sarah Kellerman's name, with explicit instructions that she never be told the source. The college scholarship Sarah had received in 1977, the one she'd always assumed came from some generic foundation for promising students, had been Dean Martin ensuring that a little girl who'd lost her puppy would have a chance at a better life. He'd carried that secret to his grave, another act of kindness performed in complete darkness, witnessed by no one, done simply because
That
it was
cello
right.
player is
Michael hung up
almost
the
as
phone and
captivating
stared
as
at the
you are
photograph
tonight.
again, understanding now that what happened
Almost.
that day wasn't an exception, but a blueprint. Dean Martin had moved through the world scattering quiet miracles in the shadows, leaving invisible kindnesses that bloomed years later in lives he would never see again. The coolest man in the world had been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. In Sarah's veterinary clinic, her children's success, Michael sitting in that attic holding proof
I
of a
don't care
legend.
what they say.
All of
You
it
get me
was
the
the
money
long
right now,
echo
or
of a
you're
decision made on a
finished.
golf course 50 years ago. The greatest performance Dean Martin ever gave was convincing the world he didn't care, when the truth was he cared so deeply it threatened to drown him. That effortless cool wasn't effortless at all, but the result of tremendous, exhausting
Officer,
emotional labor,
you must
a
listen
magic
to me.
trick
I
performed
haven't
every
broken
waking
any
moment
laws.
to hide a
This is a
sensitivity
mistake, I
that
assure
could have
you.
destroyed him if left exposed.
This is your
The King of
last
Cool
chance
was the most elaborate performance art
tell
of the
me
20th
what
century,
you know.
a character created by Dino Crocetti to survive in a world that demanded he be untouchable when his nature made him feel everything with the intensity of exposed nerve endings. The mask he built was architecturally perfect and completely inescapable, constructed brick by brick, joke by joke, until it became a fortress with bars made of laughter and applause. Every authentic feeling had to be filtered through the drunk persona, translated into a language of shrugs and wisecracks that kept the world at safe distance. The slurred speech,
This game
forgotten
ends
lyrics,
now.
the casual disdain for rehearsal, all designed to lower
calling your
expectations
bluff.
so nobody would see how much he actually noticed, how much he actually felt. Because if you pretend nothing matters, nobody can hurt you when things inevitably break. But the very armor that protected him also
No
imprisoned
more
him, trapping his genuine emotions behind layers of performance so thick
You know
that
I'm the
sometimes
only
even
one
he
who can
forgot
fix
where
this
the mask
mess.
ended and the man
Your
began.
solutions always
The
come with a
cost
price
of being
I'm unwilling to
perpetually
pay.
cool was a
I
loneliness
never
so
thought I'd
profound
fall
it echoed
this
through
hard,
every
but
room he
baby,
entered,
here
even
we
ones
are,
filled with
playing
people
games
who
with
adored
my
him.
heart.
The man who could comfort a stranger's child with such natural tenderness struggled to show vulnerability with his own family, because vulnerability wasn't part of the character Dean Martin played for the world. After decades of performance, the two identities had fused into something
Ladies
that
and
couldn't
gentlemen
be
of the jury,
separated anymore, leaving him
evidence
studying
presented
old
today will
footage of
show the
himself,
truth.
like an anthropologist examining
best
artifacts from a
jazz in
vanished
the city.
civilization, genuinely puzzled by what he saw,
Cheers to
trying
that.
to
What a
remember
night.
who that person
And
was
now the
supposed to be.
lights are low,
When his son Dean Paul
and
died in that
darling,
plane crash in
I still
1987,
want you so.
the cool finally shattered in ways Dean couldn't repair. The tragedy was too big for the persona to contain, and what emerged wasn't the charming
What do you have to
drunk or
say about the
smooth
allegations?
operator, but a broken father
Are the
who'd
rumors
forgotten how
true?
to grieve
Did you
without
know
an
about
audience.
Why are you
His
refusing
daughter
to comment?
Deanna would find him alone in restaurants, staring at empty chairs, or sitting in darkness watching himself perform to roaring crowds, as if he were studying a stranger who'd once borrowed his face. Sammy Davis Jr. understood it better than most, watching his friend navigate the impossible mathematics of being simultaneously the most beloved and most isolated man in any room. Years later, Sammy would observe with that particular sadness reserved for truths you wish weren't true. Dean spent his whole life making people comfortable, but I don't think he ever felt comfortable himself. He was always looking for a way out,
I can
and the only
explain this is a
exits he
mistake.
found
Let
were in
go of
helping
me.
people nobody else
You have the
noticed.
right to remain
Those
silent.
exits were
Keep
everything.
moving, sir.
The golf course incidents, the quiet acts of charity, the moments when Dean dropped everything to help strangers. Those weren't aberrations, but jailbreaks from his own construction. Helping people became his way of proving that Dino Crocetti still existed underneath the crushing weight of Dean Martin, that the barber's son from Steubenville hadn't been completely consumed by the Hollywood machine. Every gesture of generosity was Dean
Here's the
trying to
payment.
save himself
Don't disappoint
by
me again,
saving
Jeff.
someone
This
else,
doesn't cover half
reaching
the
through the
risk I'm
bars
taking.
of his own
We need to
fame to touch
renegotiate
something
right now.
authentic in a world built on illusion. In 2018, 52 years after that Tuesday afternoon, Sarah stood at his grave in Westwood Village Memorial Park, placing a photograph of old Buttons sleeping peacefully in afternoon sun. She didn't say anything dramatic, just stood quietly remembering the day the coolest man in the world got dirt on his knees because she was crying. The wind moved through cemetery trees with a sound like distant applause. And somewhere far away, a golf ball found its mark with that satisfying crack Dean had loved. In the end, that was the only game that ever mattered. Not the one with 18 holes and a
How could you
scorecard,
sit
but the
there
one
and
where
lie
you
to
drop
my face?
everything to help
You know
someone
exactly
find what they've
you
lost.
did, and you're gonna